Good evening, everyone. My name is Ian Andrews with LakewoodAlive's. Thanks so much for being here tonight for the latest in the Knowing Your Home Workshop series, Interior Painting Best Practices. You're going to hear from my colleagues, Allison Urbanek and Matt Clark, here in just a moment. But first, we want to thank our sponsors of the Knowing Your Home Workshop series, First Federal Lakewood, the City of Lakewood, Lakewood Public Library, and Cleveland Lumber. They've all been fantastic partners with our efforts to ensure that everyone in Lakewood lives in a healthy and safe housing. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Allison Urbanek, who is our Housing and Internal Operations Director. Allison, we're recording. We are good to go. Take it away.
Great, Ian. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for being here with us tonight. We are doing interior painting. This is the first time we've done it. And thanks to Matt Clark here, he built the wall that we're able to use. It may look familiar to you. We had it for our window and door workshop. And so we've zhuzhed it up a little bit here, and we're going to use it for interior painting. So today we're super excited to be here with you. So we're going to cover several topics, anything from safety as to prepping, repairing, cleaning, painting, and then the final clean to help you do it quickly and safely, and really a job well done. So tonight, Matt's going to lead us. I'm going to participate as I can, and we would love to have questions from you. There's a Q&A box at the bottom. If you want to click on that and put your questions in, we will take those in real time, and they'll help us kind of guide the conversation tonight. So I am going to turn it over to Matt to get started. We're going to start with our safety.
Hey, everybody. I hope everybody's having a good evening. Whenever you end up watching this, if you watch on YouTube, a good day. Yeah, the first thing we want to talk about is safety. Lead safety is a big concern. You want to make sure that when you're doing anything with removing paint or sanding paint or anything like that, you want to be aware that it potentially could have lead in it. So main thing, which everybody's used to by now, are masks. Wearing a mask is key. Wearing eye protection is key when dealing with lead. Wearing gloves also helps. Ventilating. Don't work in a small area that you cannot ventilate with a fan or by opening multiple windows. What else? Shot vac to gather the dust immediately works, and wet sanding is another method that we can use to do it. But mainly, I mean, the mask and eye protection is key.
Sure. So we're in our, Ian, if you could bring up our PowerPoint, there's a really handy handout called How to Keep Your Family Safe and Renovate Right, offered by the EPA. So there's a lot of great information here, and it's a place for you to start. You go to EPA.gov, you can bring up Renovate Right. The thing to think about when painting is to always presume that you're working with lead-based paint. Our housing stock is 80 to 100 years old. They stopped placing lead into paint in 1978. If you see paint and it's kind of got alligatoring or crackling going on, that's definitely a sign that it's lead-based paint and it's nearing the end of its life. You can go to Home Depot, Sherwin-Williams, Lakewood Hardware, and buy little tester strips, the little sticks, and you open them up and you stick them on. If they turn pink, it means it's lead-based paint. And you can have a professional come in, a lead inspector, and determine where you have lead-based paint. So as Matt mentioned, spot on, you want to wear your mask, eye covering, gloves, and make sure that you are in a contained area. If you're doing any sort of stripping, any sort of scraping, and if you have a ventilation system, of course, right, we heat our homes somehow. If you have forced air, make sure you're covering all of your vents, and make sure that your heating system is not running at that time, because you don't want anything to be sucked in by accident. So if it's air conditioning or heating, just turn it off while you're working and make sure that you have your vents covered. And then you can also put up plastic to contain your area. And then again, you just want to make sure that you clean. And again, How to Renovate Right will tell you the proper way to clean your area. I am a certified lead inspector, so you can give me a call. I'm happy to talk through that with you. So I think we can move on to the more fun parts of this process.
Sure. Next thing we want to talk about is just the basic tools that you would need for the job. for an interior paint job. And we're going to also talk about drywall work and drywall repair as well. First, we'll just go through some popular tools for painting, doing an interior painting job. And what we'd like to do is sort of go through the process of how you want to start the job. So we'll start with the tools that you would want to use first and work our way through to the end all be all, which would be brushes and rollers. So first thing and most important thing for working on, we have a lot of stuff here, as you can see, because it involves a lot of different tools and items, but you want to clean the wall off. So what we did here on our demonstration wall is we cleaned it thoroughly, we mud and taped it, and we put a base couple of layers of paint on there. We left some trim work open and stuff so we could show you guys how to do it. But a real simple way to get a wall good and clean before you just like work on sanding it, it's good to just get a bucket with some sponges. Dollar General or Dollar Store or whatever that dollar.
We are a Dollar Tree family here.
Dollar
Tree
has a bunch of stuff for $1 apparently. So you can use a mixture of white vinegar, baking soda, and just regular water, warm water. Put it in a spray bottle, and you would spray the wall down, and then just gently wipe it, or use a bucket and make your mixture in a bucket, and just gently wipe it down. And you'll see especially if you have a house that had a smoker in it, or kids or whatever, dirty hands and stuff like that, or pets rubbing up against door jams and stuff. This mixture cleans it very well, and the sponges that have a little bit of an abrasive side are great too for getting the stuff that you can't really get off too easily.
Right, and if you are use the scrubby part if you are going to paint. If you're not going to paint and you're just cleaning your baseboards or your walls, don't use the scrubby side because it might take the paint off. And then Magic Eraser, Matt, they now make sheets of Magic
Eraser.
I didn't know that. So you can buy a book of Magic Eraser and use the sheets because it is a magic eraser.
It does do magic. We've used this Oops or Goo-Gone. It's a cleaning solution. You just need a little bit of it, and it can get marker, stuff like that. We'll show you a little later on how that actually works. But that's another good tool or item to have when you start the process. I've also used a little bit of Pine Sol before on heavier duty stains and stuff. If you're doing it to an existing wall, don't be alarmed if you start taking off a little bit of the paint that's on there, because your next step will be to even out any of the rough surfaces that are on the wall. And basically, we have a couple different grits of these are sanding sponges or sanding blocks. They're great because you can take a bucket, and this is for safety too. Take a bucket of water or a spray bottle with just regular water in it and soak your sponges in there. And then when they're good and wet, bring them out. And then if you have anything like right here, we have a little bit of a messy caulk job that somebody did. I don't know who it was. And you could use this to work that down so when you paint, it's not as prevalent. You won't see it a line there where the caulk job was done messily.
And because it was wet, because that sponge is wet, it's going to really trap that dust.
Yeah, and it won't. It's when you're in a house when you have family living together, you're trying to do a house that's occupied. It's really important to keep that dust down. Another thing, if you're doing a whole, like say you're doing one whole bedroom, it's good to buy a sheet of plastic. We have tarps available at the toolbox that you can borrow. Spread those out on the floor before you start doing anything, or plastic on the floor. Just be careful if you wash your walls down and you have plastic on the floor, it can get slippery. Tape off your doors too with plastic sheeting. That will really keep dust out of the house. So this 4 mil plastic drop cloth works great. Open it up, it's a big rectangle. It's 9 by 12, so you don't have to cut it. And then get some low tack painter's tape and just tape the frame of your door, leaving you a little bit where you can just remove the tape and go out the door if you need to get out. But if you're doing a large jobs that will generate a lot of dust. It keeps the dust in the work area, which is important.
And again, just reminding us about lead, that's why it's even more important, but happy family members containing dust is
And
very
it's cleanup.
important.
I mean, you won't see it until the next morning when you get up and you look, and any surface in your house will have a little layer
Everywhere.
of dust on it.
It doesn't stop.
So we're wet sanding this, and you also check for different discrepancies in the wall where there might have been damage or like previous paint jobs got brush hairs in them or dust or dog hairs. And you can, to check for that, a real easy way where you can see where you have blemishes and stuff is just taking a flashlight and you look down the wall like this and you can pick up on even old drywall imperfections that you can easily fix where the drywall mud was done or more importantly, like with plaster, where some of the plaster might have failed. But I see a couple little spots right there. I would mark those with a pencil, get my wet sponge, and just gently even those out.
And just a gentle reminder, we live in old houses and their walls are well loved. So you may find a lot of imperfections.
So yeah, and then I mean, if you need a professional plaster repairman or something like that, or you want us to come out and look at it and give you our opinion, we're more than happy to do that. Just call us at Lakewood Alive and we'll set something up for you. But once you get your walls sanded down and nice and smooth and nice, and well, that's another important thing is after you sand down something, you have dust on the wall. So you don't have to get the vinegar and stuff out again. You can just take like a lint-free low tack cloth or tack cloth and you just get a little wet. They make ones that you don't have to get wet. They're actually sticky too, but I prefer just a little, it's damp. Like if you're dusting your shelves or something, and just wipe the wall down real gentle. Wipe any trim pieces off because even if you're wet sanding, there might be a little wet dust on there. Wipe all that off and let it dry for 15 minutes, and then you are ready to start doing the rest of the prep of your wall for paint. We move on now with actually taping off the wall. Unless there's anything else we're missing from our little helper outline that we have taped to the wall that
No.
you can hear in studio Lakewood Alive.
See, look at how professional we are here.
Cue cards.
So I think right now we're going to be cleaning, sanding, now priming. So we're prepping still.
We're prepping still, yeah. And I mean, if you're priming and you're gonna paint your trim too, you don't have to spend the time taping your trim off. You can just, not willy-nilly, but you can be a little bit curious on how you paint, and just watch for drip marks when you're priming. A lot of the new paints have primer in them, which is like these two did, which is great. So I didn't have to actually prime any of this. I just had to sand it down, make sure there's no imperfections in the mud I did, and have at it. So when doing like we did here, we rolled on these. I cut in trim around here earlier. I didn't cut in this trim so we could show you an easy way to do that with the tape or with one of our other tools. And then we will show you guys how to roll over here on the tan side, I believe, or the blue side. We're going to see what picks our fancy in the next 10 minutes. So,
and if we could just talk about that for just a second, the painting. So they do still sell plain old primer, right? So you can get a stain blocker. Say you had a really, you moved into a house and it was maroon colored walls. Mm-hmm. You could definitely use a regular primer if you want to make sure, because the primer and paint in one is a thicker paint.
Right.
A lot thicker. So you have to get used to working with that thicker paint. It does speed up the process, definitely. But there are situations where you're going to want to use a standalone primer. And we are going to talk about types of paint.
And we're going to get into a couple of like specific repairs that you can do, whether it's small holes, big holes, or water damage. Just to, right now we're just going to, because that's on the other side of the wall. Mm-hmm. But right now we're just going to talk about applying the paint and what types of tools you would need just to do painting on a pretty clean wall where you had to do some minor sanding and cleaning. But we'll get into the repairs as part of the process in a little bit. So basically, general rule of thumb is, you paint all your trim or you paint all your wall first. I mean, I prefer to do my trim first because I think it's easier to cut in on this surface than it is to cut on this side. Allison?
I paint the wall first and then do the trim because I can put the tape on the painted wall. I'm not a very good trim painter. I'm telling you this. I am not a good trim painter. I am a good wall painter. So I tape up my wall to protect it and then do my trim.
Yeah, I don't know. That's how it's personal.
You're a
preference.
good trim painter.
There's no real way to go at it besides what you feel comfortable with. So in an area like this, where this is basically a chair rail or a baseboard, we painted this trim, basically all you want to do is you want to put the tape right up against.
This is where the cleaning comes in handy, because if it's not clean, the tape is not going to stick.
And then you'll be touching up like crazy.
And it won't stick if it's wet. So it's a good way, a rule of thumb, to know if you're ready to paint.
So just taping that off like that, real simple. And then on a side like this, and there's different thicknesses of tape. This is 2 inch, this is 1.5 inches.
And I have found that not all painter's tape is the same.
No, and you basically, and not all blue tape is painter's tape, because you can buy blue duct tape or blue, Gorilla tape or something that will not come off really easily, and it will basically make you'll have to do it over. But I like tearing the pieces in, easy to manage, like 12-inch pieces. So on this part right here, I would just do the same thing. Keep that straight and set it right up against your wall line.
There's also green tape, the frog tape, there's the blue tape. I don't know
if it's low tack tape, which means it doesn't stick really hard. Like it's not something you would use to, repair something or, but it doesn't. The reason painters use it is because when you pull it off, it will not damage, generally speaking, the previously painted surface. So we got a little bit there, we got a little bit there. We can move on to brushes right now, so we can keep going with the trim. Let me grab the tan paint real quick.
So Ian, how are we doing? Are we sounding good?
Sounding great. Everything is loud and clear. Good video. We're good to go. No questions thus far.
Great. And so you all are getting inside baseball of what the studio Lakewood Alive looks like, which is our storeroom. But we would love to take your questions. Please feel free to continue to ask them. We would love to hear from you as we move forward here. Now we're moving on to brown tan paint.
For the trim, yeah. Basically, just getting prepped for this. This is a little handy roller cup for a mini roller or a brush. Real nice, has a handle on it, so you don't have to carry your paint can around when you're doing a little trim work. It's also great for cleanup because you can just let the old paint, a thin layer of the old paint, let it dry, and you can just pull it out of the container.
It's very cathartic.
Yeah, it's almost therapeutic, actually.
Oh, thank you.
Not cathartic. I think that's the right word, right?
Well, could be both.
English major.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, history major.
Anywho.
So you get that emptied to save time, so we don't have to demonstrate each tiny little step, because a lot of people know how to do a lot of this. We're just trying to piece together.
So this is a 5-gallon bucket that has, we used this a year ago or so, year and a half ago. So it's been sitting in a conditioned environment.
Yeah, ambient temperatures. It's important to store your paint in ambient temperature and also away from anything that might be open flames. Because especially old paint, if you buy a new house and there's old paint, give us a call. The Lakewood Refuse Department is great about taking water-based paints that are dried up and their oil-based paints that are not. But there's tricks using cat litter and sawdust and other things that can help you dry up both types of paints.
Yeah, they won't take any liquid paint.
So you have to dry them both up.
Dollar Tree, The cat litter.
Yeah. If you don't see it, trust me, if you don't see it on the floor, on the display, in one of the racks, just ask. It's always in the back. So
now it's
it
mixed.
just gave it a good mix. You want to just check for clumps. If there's a thick layer of paint on the bottom that you can see and it's settled, it's probably not good.
And if it smells like rotten eggs, it's also bad.
That's a general thumb for anything.
Well, yes, but paint too.
But, so yeah, mix it up. You know what I want to do before I start, actually? Just gonna lay it on a tarp. So we don't, in case I get clumsy and have any spills. Be wary that a lot of times your tarps, and I know this because I've done this, you clean up from a project, you're sanding or whatever, or you're painting, and you just roll the tarp up and you throw it in the basement. For the next project, you're in your nice clean area that you just cleaned up, washed down your walls and everything else, and you say, I'm just gonna throw out my tarp, and guess what? There's a ton of dust in there.
Paint chips. You were tired, you were ready to do something else, you rolled it up and shoved it in the garage.
Yep.
We've all been there.
You want to shake it out outside first, or
well, you want
if you shake it out at the end of your first project, you're good. But you also want to make sure there's no bad dust in there or anything else.
Right, so shake it into your garbage bag.
Yeah, roll it up and then just unroll it into your garbage can.
Matt will come and help you.
I love it. Love shaking tarps. Shake it off, like T Swift says. All right. So we're going to move our potential spill onto the tarp. We're going to move our paint container onto the tarp. We're going to get everything. It's really important when painting and having cans of paint on the ground and everything else that you just keep your work area as clear as possible. So in a case like this, we're going to do this right in front of the wall, but if I was painting a wall in my house, I like to take an old piece of cardboard and put it in the corner and put my open container of paint on that, big enough that I can pour the paint into my receptacle over that cardboard and not spill, but also away from the project area enough that I don't kick it over when I'm getting so excited about painting.
So Matt, when I was a child, we were painting, my dad owned a garage and we were painting the floor, and I was 5 years old and I was so excited to be painting, so excited that I ran and I jumped and I knocked over an entire gallon of paint on the floor. If my dad would have followed your rule of thumb, we would not have had the paint debacle of 1988. So this is a good thing.
So
follow the rules.
Right now, thank you, Allison, for that tidbit. I
happens.
spilled it on my boots before, and I had yellow boots for,
I have splatters on my shoes.
For weeks. But when doing trim work, especially brush, there's an angle brush. Here's a brand new one that we got from our friends at Sherwin-Williams up on Madison. Thank you, Lucas. But it's angled so that you can cut in along the lines of the trim, and you can create a fine line. Professional painters, somebody with a very steady hand doesn't need to tape a lot. You can get that. I mean, I've painted enough in houses I've owned or houses that I've worked on that I can generally do it without tape. But if you have a nice open area that's easy to tape and you're not like crawling around on the floor or something like that, then I would recommend taping, because at the end of the day, the less amount of touch-ups you have to do, the better. So right now I'm going to take the 5-gallon bucket of our tan paint, and it's a water-based interior wall paint. It's 0 VOC, so it doesn't have a lot of odor or chemical, dangerous chemicals coming out of it. We're in a well-ventilated room. We don't need to cover any vents for this because we're done with the dust. So I'm just going to put a little bit in the bucket. Make sure you keep everything on your tarp or on something protecting your floor. And just pour it straight out. Lift it up, let it drip into your container a little bit. Stand it up and then take your brush. You can see this a little better here. Take your brush and wipe up the drips with your brush. always try to keep the back label and even the front label and any color demarcation that would be on the lid. Always try to keep those clear of paint, because this is a lesson learned. When you're trying to clean up the paint and you're looking for what you should use to clean it up with, whether it's soapy water or mineral spirits, you want to be able to read the directions on the back. When you run out of paint and you're trying to figure out how to get the same exact color, because you want your room to be the same color, you need that paint demarcation number or barcode that's on the top. So try to keep that clear as well. It's also nice to have the front label clear so you can see, just in case you forgot that it was flat or semi-gloss or something like that.
Another trick for that is if you pick your color out with a little card from Sherwin, wherever Sherwin, you can put it behind your light switch. You cut a little bit with the name and the color, and you tape it back there so it's in the same room.
So we poured our tan trim paint into our little handy bucket here. It's really nice because it has, I don't know if you guys can see this, it has some little grooves. So if you're using a roller, you can use the roller on that, or you can just sort of get excess paint off of your paintbrush that way too. You want to make sure if it's a brush too that you've used before and you've cleaned, that it's completely dry. Because if there's water in there or chemicals in there, it'll actually thin your paint, and it'll change the color of the paint, the drying color. So you could have a nice tan wall and then a really light khaki, like Cuban sunset khaki or something instead of grayish. So, but real simple. You take your trim brush and pretend there's tape up here. It'll look like it was taped.
Such a professional.
But you just real steady all the way down. Now what I like to do is just sort of, if you see any heavy areas, just sort of wick them away. And I like to do, like I said, my trim first, but I also like, when I'm done with the wall paint, I check to make sure there's no brush marks from when I wick that away, and if there is, then I touch them up with a little mini roller. So I'm just going right down the trim like that. The same thing you would do over here. Just follow along the baseboard.
And the nice thing about that feathering technique that he does is that when it dries, it's going to dry and kind of blend into the wall, where if you were to do a straight line, it's going to dry kind of heavy and straight. So it just blends in a little bit more, so it shows looks like you painted all at one time.
So there you go. With that tan trim, we're going to, the next thing we're going to do, we can do some blue trim, I guess, or we can start rolling.
So do you think this would be a good idea to pause and talk about the different types of paints, or do you want to do?
No, that sounds like a good idea. And then I can prep the blue paint.
Okay, so Ian, do you mind pulling up the PowerPoint, please? It is the top layer over here.
Oh, and one other thing real quick, sorry. That you can use.
Hey, Ian,
can you get back for me? Sorry, I just saw this on there. We have so many tools, which is great. Again, we have little things like this at the toolbox if you want to try it before you buy it. These aren't that expensive. We're also having tool sale, as a reminder, on Sunday the 12th from 9 to 12, and we'll have things like this for sale. So this is just a standard, they call it a super guide or an edging tool, and you can use that to protect your walls or protect your trim when you're painting. So you would put it, up against your trim and then just use your brush against it like this. It's not generally as clean as tape because your wall might not be super even, and this is a completely straight edge, but it's pretty easy. And if you don't use too much paint, use a drier brush, then you can get a pretty clean look. And if you do, like, say you miss and you have a little, can we get a close up of that, Allison? So I missed on purpose.
Mark it on history.
But a really easy way to, after that dries, well, you can wipe it off right away. But sometimes if you have this all done, then you end up wiping off your wall paint, and you'll be touching up forever. But you can, little arts and craft stores have little foam brushes like this. These are great for touching up these little spots. Just put some of the white trim paint on there after everything's dry, and just you can touch it up. Q-tips are also really good for tiny little touch-up spots, especially when you're doing, like, you have a white ceiling and you have a blue wall. You know, it's really hard, even with some of the taping, to get that perfect, especially with the textured ceiling like a lot of us have in Lakewood, or uneven plaster. So taking a Q-tip and just touching that up is a really easy way to do it. So we're gonna do types of paint.
So now we're gonna flip back to the PowerPoint queue. All right, so if you're anything like me, you go in there and you just to the paint store and you just wonder, what type of finishes should I have on my paint? So if you, just so you seem like a professional when you walk in, there's flat, satin, eggshell, semi-gloss, and gloss. And they tend to give them fancy names. So like a Behr paint is gonna maybe have a different set of finish compared to a Sherwin-Williams paint. And we're gonna go over each type of paint using these terms and really where the best place to use them is. So next slide. All right, so flat paints. So the flat paint has no gloss at all. So the upside of that is that they hide imperfections. So for our walls that are 100 years old and they've seen a lot of things, the flat paint tends to look the nicest. The downside of a flat paint, though, is that it scuffs. You see lines in it fairly easily. If a dog, my dog, kind of rubs up against when he's walking up the stairs and there's like a little brown fur oil line that goes up the steps. Flat paint, you just kind of have to live with it. It's hard to clean, but it looks good. So, and spaces with low lighting, because there's no gloss on it, it tends to just look good. So again, they don't have stain resistance, and they should be used in more formal rooms, according to Sherwin-Williams, because people aren't in those rooms very much. So it's not really for a paint where you're going to live in. I don't know why they think a living room is not a place that you live in. I'm in my living room probably 75% of the time, but you know, you do you, Sherwin. Next slide. Satin. So satin is the first level of shininess. So it's just a snitch of shiny that gives, it's basically flat with a little bit of flare. They hide imperfections just as well, but give you a little bit of scrub resistance. I really wanted to use a satin paint in my hallway. My contractor talked me out of it. I regret it to this day. Satin, for me, is the lowest I will ever go. It's my lowest paint standard because I have dogs. I'll always have dogs. I have a husband who gets grimy hands and touches things. So satin, to me, is the lowest level. It adds a little bit of shimmer, shiny, easier to clean. And it's good for hallways, living rooms, you know, places that you live in, maybe where your walls are a little bit rougher and you just aren't going to tear them down and start over. Next slide. Semi-gloss. So this is the shiniest of, this is a shiny, very shiny paint. It's good for rooms that are going to have a lot of cleaning. Kids' rooms, kitchens, bathrooms, laundry rooms, where you're going to be splattering things, where someone may come in with a marker and write on the wall. But it is going to be glossy. So it's not a room that you want to have a lot of lighting in. So a lot of overhead lighting, because it's going to look very shiny. But they clean up real easily. So if you're a big fan of lamps and you want to use it in a kid room, probably the best because it cleans up so easily. Next slide. And then there's glossy, super gloss. That is like paint on steroids. So it's probably not something that you would use in a residential setting. It'd probably be more in a commercial setting in restaurants or kitchens or things, but they do make it. If you are just really all about cleaning the walls constantly, a very high gloss paint would be for you. And you could use it on your kitchen cabinets, doors, trim. So high gloss paint, and Matt has some trim paint in his hand right now. It is super glossy. This is a Sherwin-Williams product, Pro Classic trim paint, and I use that on my trim, and let me tell you, it's a dream. It just cleans up so nice, and it does have a nice high finish. So not necessarily for your walls, but for cabinets. If you're going to be painting your kitchen cabinets, giving them new life, this is what you would use. Also on your trim, on your handrails, if you have painted handrails, it is a good paint to use in that situation. Next slide. Okay, so I just wanted to show everyone the images again. Again, you'll see the difference between a flat paint and a high gloss paint. So if you're not sure exactly which kind of finish you want, go and talk to the person at the paint store. You know, we love going up to Sherwin-Williams. Lucas and his team here in Lakewood are so fantastic. They're so knowledgeable. We were up there recently talking about a project, and we asked some questions, and they really turned us to the right paint. We have a volunteer project coming up where we're going to be doing trim work, and they, as I thought would push us to the Pro Classic because it's amazing on trim. But they are so knowledgeable, and they'll help you pick out the right finish for you. Okay, so I think we're good with paint, right? Types of paint.
Yep, we're just gonna do a little bit of trim painting on the blue, and then we're gonna take the.
Hey, Allison, while Matt's doing that, we have two questions that have come through.
Okay.
I can ask. What tools are used to paint a raised panel door? Should you leave it on the hinges?
So you would definitely take that off the hinges.
Yeah, I would take it off the hinges and set it flat on some sawhorses. And you would use a mini roller like that, and a brush, because you would want to get everything covered inside the panels, in the molding, I guess you could say, of the panels. You want to use you could use a trim brush for that. One important thing to do, though, to note, is if it's an old panel door, there is probably like 6 layers of paint on it, and there's probably dirt underneath those. So once you start painting, but before you start painting, you want to make sure that you have scraped all of that out of there. And a good way to do the interior part of the door is of the panels is to use a wire brush, or one of these. This is a 6-in-1 tool. It's really good. It's got a lot of different things. You can open a paint can with it. That little pointy edge is great for working in crevices. Just be gentle with it. Again, watch for paint chips, lead paint, wear your mask and your glasses. This edge is also good for getting into cracks and crevices. But one other thing we're going to talk about, but since the question was asked, we'll delve into it a little bit right now, is using a stripper. Like, this is a citrus strip. It's great. It's low odor. You would want to wear gloves, but probably a little heavier duty than this, like the kitchen gloves that Allison will show you right now. We have a couple of those. But yeah, those are good. And you put this on with
Dollar Tree. You
can put this on with just an old paintbrush or a cheap paintbrush, and then you'll want to remove the main part of it with a scraper of 6-in-1, or you can get 3 packs of these little plastic scrapers in 3 different sizes at Lakewood Hardware. Those are great. And then you take an old rag, and I believe it is mineral spirits.
And that's
or a paint stripper wash, and then mineral spirits. to remove the residue of the stripper. And you'd be amazed that citrus strip is something that Alice and I both use. We both like because you can leave it on there for more than a certain amount of time. A lot of the high chemical strippers you have to remove quickly because they will actually damage the wood as well. Citrus strip is mild enough that you don't have to, but does a good job, that you don't have to remove it quickly.
Right, and it's, again, as Matt mentioned, it doesn't have a noxious smell, low VOC, it smells like oranges, it's actually quite pleasant. And if you're like me, I think, oh, today's the day I'm going to strip this chair. And then someone texts me halfway through and says, hey, you want to go up to the Lakewood Truck Park? And I say, sure do. So then I clean up and head down and then think I'm going to pick it up the next day, and I don't. So it does sit well. You can also use a heat gun. We do have them at the toolbox. And it's, you want to read up on what you're doing on it, but it is a way to get off strips of paint. But if the Citra Peel doesn't get it off, I'm thinking that this heat gun will. But it really goes through latex and the Citra Peel goes through latex and
Water-based.
oil-based paint. So it really works like a charm.
Having a little wire brush too is great for getting in the corners where your door panels are meeting together. I've done it. I've done plenty of doors, and if I'm taking them down to wood, then I'll strip them out with using citrus strip. Another product though that we did our cabinet workshop, our Knowing Your Home
Which
cabinet
you can
workshop
watch on our YouTube channel.
is Sherwin-Williams makes a primer that has been developed recently in the last couple of years that you can basically, you're just going to sand gently your door down, make sure it's clean, wash the cracks and crevices out really well, make sure there's no chipped paint. And if you do have some major chipping, but it's only in certain spots, you can fix that with a little bit of spackle, just fill in those holes. But it's a primer that is designed to adhere to any type of paint, basically.
And it self-levels.
So it's really great to use. And then so you would set your door down off the hinges. You would clean the heck out of it, paint the whole thing with the primer, let that dry completely, check it with a flashlight to see if there's any misses or holidays, as they say, or any little brush hairs caught. Clean those up if necessary, and then you paint your finished coat on there. Probably need 1 or 2 coats depending on the color you pick, but it's key. I mean, having owned houses where somebody painted a bathroom wall with oil-based paint, and then me not knowing at the time 20 years ago and putting water-based paint on it almost peels off.
Yeah.
Like before it can even dry, it's falling off the wall. So not knowing what some type of paint somebody put on your walls or doors or cabinets, it's this primer that Sherwin-Williams sells is it's an amazing product if you are not taking it down to wood. If you're taking it down to wood, then I would strip it down.
Sure, and then another thing to remember is that you take your door down. We are in an older home. The weather may have changed, or something was a little, someone, we call it at my house, Uncle Franked something to make it work. So we did do our window and door workshop that you can find on the YouTube channel. And Matt goes over all of the ways that you can get that door back up and back to snuff. So
yeah, planing the sides and making it square again, because I mean, any square opening in your house over 100 years will shift. Doesn't matter.
Right.
It doesn't matter how it was built. It'll shift one way or I mean, I've had doors that actually in 15 years of living somewhere shifted one way and then shifted back.
Yeah.
Square again. But you can use a block plane to shave. We've done that in a toolbox video even to shave those doors down. And it's good too if you take your door completely off, check your hinges on your door side, on the hinge side, to make sure they're tight. If you need to, pull the old screws out, which are short, and put in 2.5, 3 inch screws to tighten those hinges up.
Yeah, that'll pull it up.
So we had one more question, I think.
Yeah, we do. And then you can rent the planer from the toolbox,
Yep.
borrow it. And then Matt's happy to walk you through that process.
No problem.
Great. So the final question that we had thus far, eggshell. What are the ideal rooms for eggshell?
Sure. So eggshell. So if we go back to the PowerPoint, Ian, thank you so much for all of your help tonight.
Yes.
you find that it's got a little bit of cleaning ability because of that little bit of shine. So it goes flat, and then it goes satin, then eggshell. So eggshell is a room that you're going to live in. So if you're spending a lot of time in your kitchen, probably your bathroom, and again, if you have a lot of little kids and your living room is really lived in, and you want to have that easy clean. Like I like it because my dogs are dogs, and I kind of run after them and clean up the wall, and it doesn't remove the paint. So an eggshell is nice for a room that's going to be lived in. So if we go down to the eggshell section here in the PowerPoint, just so that folks can see where it is. Let's see.
There wasn't eggshell.
Oh, there should have been. Oh, sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. So again, I think it's in a high trafficked room where the eggshell really will shine. But it will show imperfections because of the shine. So you just want to balance that. So lived in rooms, I guess, is the short answer. We will go over types of paint of Sherwin-Williams paints, just so you can see all the different types that they have a little bit later on, if you have questions about the different levels of paint that they have.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so what we're gonna do now is I've painted this little bit of trim here, the blue trim, as you can see, that we repaired before. And then if Allison, if you could get a close up on this, we're basically done cutting in the walls. So actually, before we remove the tape, we should probably, if you haven't rollered your wall yet, if you haven't painted your wall with the roller, you want to leave the tape on.
You do.
Because just to protect your trim paint, if you did your trim first.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as rolling goes, there's a couple of different things that you can use to roll, and we are going to do tan for rolling. It's all, surgical gloves are always great for painting because they allow for dexterity when you're handling a brush, as opposed to like a kitchen, like one of these yellow rubber gloves, which for stripping is better. But yeah, it keeps your hands clean, your nails clean, and it also allows you to handle a smaller brush or a smaller roller. So what we have here is we have a gazillion types of rollers. And all rollers vary in price. They vary in what they call nap, which is the thickness of the roller itself. So you have like the extreme, which is 1.25 inch nap. So the distance between the roller body and the edge of the roller is the nap size. Like this big boy is used for very rough surfaces. So if you have a textured ceiling, which is basically drywall mud mixed with paint that somebody used a brush on a pole or used a trowel to design, you want to use a heavy nap roller or 1.25 inch.
And they tell you on the label what it does.
On the opposite end, you see that says 3/8 nap for smooth surfaces. And this says, they also, different rollers have different types of paint. This is flat eggshell and satin finishes. So you can get a cheaper roller that is for all flat paints. And this is a 1/2 inch nap. But since we're using the paint that we're using for the tan wall was a flat paint. So we have the 1/2 inch or 3/8 nap roller. We have a roller handle, which is basically, they have an end where you can put on a broomstick, so that if you're doing the whole wall, you can go up and down, or if you're doing a ceiling. But it's really easy. It snaps on there like that.
And you want to make sure that they're clean on the ends.
Yeah, another way, you clean on the ends, and you can go like that to make sure there's no loose little fuzzies in there, because whatever's loose in a roller or a brush will transfer to your wall.
And if we get paint in this part here where it rolls,
Right.
it will not roll properly. If
Yeah,
you're like me and a lazy cleaner, you find out too late that the roller doesn't roll.
So the roller pan you can use it like that, but it's a pain to clean. Environmentally speaking, it's probably better to use it
And
like
you
this
can pick out the paint.
and rinse it out. But these do not peel paint out as easily as the
No.
plastic ones do. This is a pan cover. It fits right in there like that.
It's life-changing.
And it is. It's a great product. You can also use a trash bag. I wouldn't recommend it because
It's not easy.
it's not very easy and it often ends up being a big mess. So today we're going to use the tray liner for this, and those can just be, you let that dry out, and when you're done, you dispose it in your trash.
Or you could pick the paint out
Well,
if
you
you
can pick
really
the paint out
like
of
it.
the tray liner too, but that's
It-
something that would make you, or would make me insane if I had to try and do that.
I do it. It depends how desperate you are to use a tray liner.
That's true. Okay, so we have our roller, we have our pan. So I'm gonna make sure that stays clean. I'm just going to find my empty spot and dump a little bit in there. And then I still have my trim brush. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just clean up the edge so I don't get any drips down on the labels.
Oh, I glob on mine.
So
I'm going to adopt the Matt Clark
that's an easy way to do it.
bucket method. My family would thank you.
So, and just, take your roller. You want to, especially when the first time you use it, it's going to take a little bit of time to get it well coated, and it might not roll perfectly. If you're doing a big project, you want to put a little more paint in there, but don't overfill it. You're going to basically fill the bottom part of the tray. So you can use the graded part to clean your roller off. So you don't have, like, one of the big mistakes that people using rollers for the first time make is they put a bunch of paint on there and they start rolling like crazy. And the next thing you know, you have paint drops all over you. It's like overspray when you're using a can of spray paint all over you and all over your floor, all over your walls.
Yeah.
And then you have to basically use up all the paint in that roller on the wall, and you have to go really slow so you don't overspray anything. It's fun to roll it really fast, but this is a process that you want to do it really slow. So even if you have a tarp covering, you'll notice, on the other side of the room, that little droplets, tiny little droplets of paint somehow found their way because of rolling too fast. It's basically something spinning, so it's throwing paint and material. If you have too much on there, it's throwing that off. So you don't want it to be dry as a bone, but getting it a good soak on there is good. And the W method is a method that some people use. It's a good way to cover everything. So you basically make a W on the wall. And then you just sort of fill in the W. So it's really easy, and you'll notice if you're painting, say you're going from a white wall to a tan wall. Right when you do this, you're going to be like, oh, it looks good. But when it dries, the next day you're going to come back and you're going to see, there's a little holiday there, even little tiny white spots where the roller just didn't cover everything. The W method's really a good way to make sure you get as maximum coverage as possible. When you're going up near your trim, just go real close, but try to put even pressure on it on the roller at all times. You don't want to go like that.
Yeah.
Because that will affect the way the paint finish looks at the end. But yeah, just cover as best you can. If you see any holidays, you can always, what I like to do is at the end of the job, if there's any paint left in, I scoop up as much of the paint on the roller as you need to use, and then I just go around and I look for holidays or where I might have, a little misstep or something that I got to clean up. I always like to keep a rag, a wet or damp rag, in my back pocket or in a bucket
Nearby.
nearby, because if you do spill paint on your trim or your floor or your drop cloth, then you can just use that to wipe it up really quick. Especially, I mean, a lot of the paints that homeowners are using now, and not stains, but paints are water-based, so they just clean up really easy.
And if you clean as you go, a lot easier than having
It's
to
a lot
clean up
easier
at
than
the
having to
end.
go back through. If you do, generally speaking, on a wood floor or something that's sealed and not necessarily porous, linoleum, tile, wood, concrete, the paint can dry and you can scrape it off, but I've seen instances where you do that and the paint actually takes some of the sealant off as well, so you still have you might not have a white spot on your floor, but you'll have a lighter spot on your floor where the sealant that was on your floor was removed. So we rolled. We're gonna remove some of our tape. Generally speaking, I like to let anything that I've taped dry, like overnight, 6 hours, 6 to 8 hours, because it comes off easy. And you don't want to just go and start ripping tape off, because there's a seal that's created between the paint on the wall and the paint on your trim. That's basically a sheet almost. It's like if you took saran wrap or plastic wrap and you spread it on there.
And if you see the green tape, the frog tape, it actually has a coating, a powder coating on it to repel the paint. And that's why it's important for you just to let it do its job, let the paint dry, because then it really has a nice clean finish.
So yeah, either way, green tape, blue tape, what I like to do is you take a razor knife and you gently run it in the seam between the paint and your tape and break that little seal or whatever you want to call it. Now again, this should have dried. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it doesn't pull off the paint, because if you don't let it dry enough, then it will pull off your wall paint. So just peel it back so that you almost like where you started, and then gently pull it down. So not bad. There's a little bit right there where the paint was still wet and it sort of bubbled up. But if that happens, then
Your Q-tip would come in
your
handy.
Q-tip, yeah, you can use the Q-tip. The little 5-in-1 tool that we talked about before. You just clean that up, and then touch it up when it's after it's dry. If there's a little bit of dried paint like that sort of clumped up, then just take the little sanding block, clean that up, and then touch it up with your Q-tip or your touch-up brush. So let's see. Oh, last bit of roller and wall painting thing, and something we went over when we did trim work, is one of the other types of rollers is this nice little guy. You can get it in that big roller, or you can get in a mini roller size that takes or uses something like this little roller stick. Really, really easy to use. They also have foam ones, that are good, that are mini rollers. Just read the labels on the rollers and note, like if you buy a flat paint, make sure you get a roller that's for flat paint. Or if you're painting a smooth surface like this, a low nap roller, 3/8 or less is great. If it's a textured thing or if it's old plaster, you want to have your nap roller like 1 to 1.25 inches. But these little mini rollers are great for doing trim and cabinets. You want to cut in your trim work with your brush, your trim brush, your angled brush. But to prevent having brush marks all over your trim, and you can see, I believe I did these with a brush. You can see there's some brush marks. But having this little guy just to clean that up really makes everything disappear. And again, you don't want to go too fast, because you can put spray from your roller onto your wall. So just doing that, they're really good for baseboards. You'll still cut in at the bottom where the baseboard meets the floor. But yeah, it makes it for a nice, even finish.
Great. So I think we're going to move here to repairs.
Yep.
Ian, do we have any questions?
No new questions.
Okay, great. So while Matt is flipping the wall around, which I may help with, if you could bring up the PowerPoint, please, and bring up the interior paint slide from Sherwin. So here you're going to see the different types of paint. So I get a little overwhelmed, I'm not gonna lie, when I go into Sherwin and they say, well, you want whatever Matt said, Arabian, Caribbean Nights, whatever it was.
Cuban sunset.
Oh, yes, Cuban sunset. And, well, what kind of paint do you want of them? I have no clue. So there's super paint, there's emerald, I think, or elegance, cashmere, captivate, duration. So as you can see here, the pricing really fluctuates between different types of paint. And a Sherwin-Williams paint is worth every penny. It's, you know, it's a high quality paint that really helps make a difference in your environment. But they do different things. Next slide. So it's important for you to see and talk to the Sherwin person of what you're trying to accomplish. Matt and I were talking about earlier, you know, when he does something at his rental property or does a project for someone who is saying, I'm going to be selling this house. Let's do the lowest cost Sherwin paint that they have, because more than likely the next person's going to come in and put their own coat of paint on that wall. So it's not really worth spending, you know, up to $75 or $100 per gallon of paint. If it's a room that you're going to really live in and you love the color, you really just want to get all of the benefits of, say, the emerald paint, that's trim enamel, but, you know, the emerald interior acrylic latex paint. You know, there are situations where you're going to want to buy the higher quality paint, whether it's the cleanability or maybe it's paint and primer, or maybe it's a cabinet paint and you're going to really give your kitchen a facelift. You know, you decide you want to invest a little bit higher. So tell the person that you're talking to, whether you're at Lakewood Hardware or if you're at Sherwin, and they will help you find the right paint. But there are all different kinds and levels, so it's best to ask questions. Okay, so thank you for that, Ian. We have now moved the wall, and we are going to move into repairing. So as you can see here, again, Matt did a great job constructing this for us. And let me tell you, it's brand new drywall, and we tried our darndest to recreate water damage for you, our beloved fans. And it was very difficult. So we'll have to use a little bit of our imaginations, but it does look fairly damaged, so we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, well, the thing with water damage, why it's so hard to replicate most of the time, and it's hard to detect too, is because, especially with newer drywall, you know, technology even, it's, a lot of it absorbs the water. So it's going to take, that's why over time you might not notice that your roof is leaking, because your drywall is basically absorbing it or even spreading it out. But a couple things that you can look for when trying to, or when noticing water damage or trying to fix it is, I'm gonna come down here. This is our water damage area. You can see how some of the paint's been stripped away there and there. These cut marks were part of our attempt at water damage, but they're also necessary and part of the process. So basically, when we pulled the blue tape off the plain drywall where we were trying to do the water damage, paint peeled off like this. This is actually paint that peeled off from like right about here when we pulled the tape off. That's also another thing. Do not leave the tape on too long, because then it will pull tape off, especially bare drywall, unpainted. I wouldn't even put tape on unpainted drywall. We just did this to make an area of our wonderful wall to do. So if you do notice bubbling or peeling paint like that, or discoloration, yellowing, then you probably are dealing with water. Most important thing is to remove the damaged area.
Well, the most important thing is to
fix your roof or fix whatever's
the
leaking.
leak.
Yeah, and then a lot of times you have to remove the area that's damaged to see where it's coming from, unless you go outside and you notice there's like a squirrel hole in your fascia-board or something. So,
and you want to make sure, I know it seems like it makes sense, but give your repair a couple days to make sure that it actually worked before you put up new drywall. I don't know how many people call me and say, I called the plumber, the leak got fixed,
yep.
I drywalled, and then I got the same problem again. So just give it a little bit of time before you do your repair.
Plus, it's also good to leave the area open so that it dries out. We're going to pretend this has been, that whatever was leaking was repaired. And we put a new piece of drywall in, and we're sort of going to fix the damaged areas of this part of the wall. That's our goal. The first thing.
And just to kind of reiterate, this is drywall, so it's going to be a little bit different than the wall that you're repairing. So this part is straight up drywall. This is the painted surface.
So yeah, and if it's plaster, it's going to come out in chunks. It won't, it's not going to, the paint will probably not peel because the plaster doesn't absorb the water as good as the drywall. Drywall will absorb the water, and then the paint will actually bubble and peel because it doesn't absorb the water.
And plaster actually can do a little bit better with water damage. It'll dry out, and it's a little bit sturdier than, because of the lath and the way that it's attached, unlike drywall, which is just gypsum or something.
Gypsum, yeah, and screwed in to it. So there were some cut marks in here. We're just going to scrape those flat to get some of that out of the way. And this is just, if you had an area of your drywall that was damaged like that for any reason, you can scrape those out. You can also use the razor knife here to just remove any of those cuts, any of those loose pieces, because you don't want those to be hanging out when you go to patch it.
So if you are repairing plaster, remember that it could have lead in it, and it could be made with horsehair. It could really be made with anything that they mixed up back then to make it. So just make sure, again, safety first, to protect yourself, and don't be surprised what you find behind the walls. I mean, people find crazy things. I found, when I took down my ceiling, I found some old newspapers that had some really ads from the 30s. Pretty cool, but they used it for insulation in my ceiling.
Yeah, old newspapers are used for everything. They use it for a vapor barrier underneath. If you I ripped up my fireplace and I pulled up a 1906 one ad from the Plain Dealer that was completely readable. So when you're doing something like this that doesn't involve too much dust, we're just trying to get the extra paper off. You can dry sand that.
And again, dry sanding is great for drywall.
Just
Plaster.
on the drywall, yeah. And plaster will create a lot of dust.
Yeah, so you'll wet
So,
sand.
and I have a little sponge here in a bucket that we'll use when we mud. So to save time, we're just going to do one of those, and then we'll show you a product that we can use on the wall here, where the paint's been pulled off. Again, and you will be able to see there. You can just sort of gently wet sand over the areas where the paint was peeled off, because you want to make sure that any loose pieces have come off. One thing that you want to worry about or not try to do is pick it, because then you could end up pulling a bunch of it off. The product that we're going to show you from Sherwin-Williams actually is a Zinsser product that does that for you. You just want to knock off any loose pieces with the wet sanding. And then we have a little bit of mud here.
And so mud comes in all different sizes. You don't have to get a 5-gallon bucket, but we're using it at a volunteer project here, so coming up. And it comes in a nice, cute little bucket, tiny handheld bucket, or you can get a 5-gallon bucket, well, 4.5.
Or even like a pint or a quart. It depends on the size of your repair that you want to do.
And it's really called joint compound, but commonly called mud.
Mud or spackle, or there's a zillion different names, but they make it that will go on white and dry pink, so you know it's dry. A couple different types, really. If you're doing a larger repair, or you're mudding and taping seams of new construction, wider drywall knives are key. For smaller jobs, you can use, this is a 4-inch knife or a 2-inch knife, really. Same thing with the buckets. One thing though is always, if you get a tiny little pint and you have a 4-inch knife, it's a pain to get that out. So get a little knife if you need to do like a tiny repair. Speaking of tiny repairs, we do have this product from Sherwin, actually, which is it's all-in-one, and it's for doing like pinholes where you want to, when you move the picture or something.
Right, we could.
You know, we could do a little bit of that corner there. Basically, it comes with its own little knife and sanding, and there's primer mixed in already with the mud. So this is my first time using this, so give me a break if it doesn't work out. But you just you squeeze it out like toothpaste. Squeeze a little bit in there. Put the lid back on so you don't squeeze any more out by accident. And then basically you use the butt end of the container. And you just put that on. You can go a little heavy. Well, first rule of thumb, whenever dealing with patching or repairing or drywall or mudding and taping, is that you can always sand it and add a little more. But you don't want to become a slave to the mud and sit there and play with it for hours, because it'll drive you insane. Yeah. Especially if you're doing a big job. So we'll let that dry for a couple hours, and you'll see when it starts to dry, it gets a little bit clear, but you'll be able to feel it. And then this handy little top part right there is a light grit sandpaper, probably 120, and you'll just sand that down until it's smooth. And then since there's primer in that already, you can just take your gallon of paint that you had and then paint it over that. One thing we started to talk about before, which just struck me, we talked about not storing near any open flames when you have old paint in your basement or anything like that. And open flames aren't just stoves, candles, whatever.
Hot water tanks.
All your pilot lights, yeah. If you have a boiler or everybody has a boiler, furnace, hot water tank, the pilot lights are all open flames. So try to keep any paint that you store on the other side of the basement, or even in another room that has ambient temperature. You don't want it to freeze, because it'll ruin the paint if the paint freezes.
And it may seem like common sense, I don't know, but as a young, early homeowner, 12 years ago, we moved in and we redid all of our woodwork, and we did it in the basement because it was cold. And then the whole house smelled like stripper and stain. And it's because it was in the basement and my furnace pulled it all through. So you want to make sure it's a real testament to good ventilation.
So what we're going to do before we apply any mud to this crack on our damaged wall here, I'm just going to show you something real quick. We're not going to actually break it open and use it, but because it's real easy to use. It's just like paint. There's a couple different products like this, but this is the one I've used before. It's a problem surface sealer. So in my instance, I had wallpaper on my drywall, and basically when I was taking the wallpaper off, I used a steamer, which we have at the toolbox, which you can borrow, and it's great for also removing smoke smells from walls. We had a customer that just our client from the toolbox who just did this whole 2-family house with it, and it worked perfectly. But it's also really good for removing wallpaper. Some wallpaper is old and the glue is old, and you're really not going to get it off. A lot of times too, if the glue wasn't mixed properly, and you can tell if you see bubbles and stuff from 20 years ago, then the glue is going to be either too tacky or not tacky enough. So you'll pull one piece of wallpaper off and you'll be like, this is going to be so easy. And then the next one, you'll be picking each thing off 2 inches at a time. But when you do pull some of it off, it could rip your actual drywall. So this product seals that so that the paint absorption is even between your ripped drywall and your non-ripped drywall. If you have a big rip, you're probably going to want to mud it out and patch it too after you seal it. But you always want to seal it first. And it brushes on and rolls on. You use it just like paint.
And it dries clear.
Dries clear, so yeah, you don't have to worry about it affecting the color of your paint or your finish. So basically, that's what I would do to prepare this for this step. And I have a mud pan here. It's really great, just like carrying around a smaller paint bucket. And it's got 2 metal fins, so it makes it really easy to clean off your tooling, especially when you're doing larger projects. You want to make sure that you have mud on one side of your knife, not 2, because otherwise you'll be dripping it all over the place. So I just put a little dab of mud on there, and I'm just basically going to fill that damage. Just make sure the whole crack is filled.
And it really, again, the lighter the skim, the coat, the easier it is to maneuver. And
so yeah, start off with a little bit, because you're going to end up, generally speaking, you'll be sanding it and filling in a little bit no matter what, unless it's like a pinhole or a nail hole or something like that. So that, I'm going to walk away from that, and we can sort of use our seam right here. Yeah, right. This was the drywall seam, as you can see up top. There's still some exposed seam.
And mud.
But this is actually 3 coats of mud and 3 sand to make it nice and even, so that when we paint it, you won't even be able to see the seam.
Nope.
If you look around Studio Lakewood Alive, you can see where it was done in the past as well.
Yeah, this and it's nice and smooth. We did not do this, but
Right. But so yeah, so that's what you want to do. You want to put that on, and then take your let your mud dry. Take your wet sanding sponge, and these ones are really nice because they have sort of an angle on them. So if you're doing like a joint near the ceiling or near the floor, you can use that to get in, or any corner joints as well. But you want to just real gently go back and forth and take that mud, down so that it's even. You'd be doing it there, and that's something where it's a little more drastic, I guess you could say. We were trying to mimic a crack in some plaster, but if there's a heavy mud presence or even a heavy plaster presence, and you got to fill in a lot of mud in an area to fix a big crack or something, and again, it's a time, it's a process that takes a lot of time to smooth out anything that's uneven, and it's somewhat gratifying that
we would be putting tape if this was a crack, right?
We'd be putting tape over it, but since it's just a bunch of mud with a squiggly line to it, just to show like how these lines they disappear, as you dry sanding. And when it gets like that, you want to rinse it out.
Yeah, so this is probably more mud than obviously needed.
It's just a bunch of mud, yeah. We're gonna just sort of try to demonstrate how it's the little lines that you hit with the sander just sort of blend into your finished surface after a while. And then again, before you paint it, you would wipe it down again and get it all cleaned off before you put your primer coat on.
How are we doing, Ian? Any questions?
No questions to report.
Great, thank you.
So our next real quick one, while we have time, is Alex, our one of our coworkers, got in here with a marker the other day, and
They just like to draw on the
yeah.
walls.
But so now, as usual, I gotta clean every mess, Lakewood Alive mess up.
Yep, that's
So-
Matt's job.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take our oops.
And so this is a satin finish. So there's a small bit of shine on it, if you can see. So those of you who are asking about eggshell, this is satin. So one step down from eggshell.
But to get rid of this permanent marker, we're gonna take our little oops thing.
So Goo Gone, oops.
Yeah.
You could also try a magic eraser
eraser.
and see, but again, be prepared that some paint may come off.
And just, I mean, if you use something like this too, and it is the markers on there pretty good, then you're gonna take some of the paint off. But then I'd rather touch up the paint than touch up than try to paint over this. And it works really good. I mean, you can see how it's already removing some of the paint. But taking that down too, and a lot of the permanent markers are like oil-based markers, so they'll eat at your sponge a little bit too. But you could use mineral spirits or something to get that off the wall, and then just clean and prep your wall like you would normally for painting.
You could use a Zinsser product, a heavy-duty stain blocker,
And just go
and
over
go
it.
over it if you wanted to, not even deal with the Goo Gone or the
But then
oops.
when you're doing that, you're most likely painting your whole wall with it and repainting the whole wall.
Right.
So, and even if you were redoing this one area, depending on how old your paint was, light and heat and everything would change the coloration of the finished product. So you might have to repaint your whole anyways. Best thing to do is don't give Alex markers.
Right. Okay, so we have talked about, are we going to talk about holes?
We can talk about, repairing a couple different ways you can repair some holes.
So we have we have about 10 minutes, I think, here, and then we're going to get to clean up. So we're going to talk really fast about how to repair a hole and looking for studs, because that's really important.
Yep.
And then we will wrap up with cleaning and the various ways that you can clean up your paint tools.
So when you have a hole like that, something like that in the wall, depending on how big it is, depending on where in the wall it is, there's a couple different ways that you can go at it. Something like this, which is right next to a stud, you can use this multi-tool or a keyhole drywall saw. And what you want to do is basically the easiest way to repair this. In this instance, where the seam is, you have a stud. Studs in modern homes are usually 16-inch on center. Using a stud finder to find them is great. Or one trick that I've used before is just, if you know where one stud is, you take a nail and you nail it through and into the wall until you hit the stud, and you can just move this way. So I usually take a tape measure, go 16 inches approximately, and go through. If it's a plaster and lath wall, you're not going to know, and you basically have to cut out the section and replaster it.
And the stud finder is not going to help you because of the way
it'll
that's attached.
Pick up the lath every time. So with a hole like this, that's smaller, I'm either going to cut it out. So I'll draw from my stud, I'll draw a square, and I'll split the stud so I have something to screw into on this side and this side. Cut out a piece of drywall, new drywall, and just replace it, and then use. This is joint tape, and you can also use this for repairs. And they also sell little kits at Lakewood Hardware that's like a 6x6 inch screen that sticks on there that you will mud and tape over. But for time, right now, we're just gonna do it with the joint tape. So basically, they make self-sticking joint tape. I'm just gonna use the stuff that you have to use some mud on. And one good thing about having a nice steel knife when you're doing this is it's easier to apply the tape. You can rip it with your hands, but basically you put the mud down and then you apply the tape on the mud and you just cut it and make sure that's nice and smooth. Put another piece on. Cut it, smooth it out. Another piece. You want to overlap a little bit. You do this on each piece of tape, just so it makes for a better seal. And cover your hole completely.
So if friends at home are asking, how large of a hole would you say you can use this technique?
I'd say, I mean, it depends on where it is. If it's a hole where your door keeps opening and putting a hole in it, I would replace it with drywall and put a door stop on the bottom. If it's a hole like you accidentally kicked in above your baseboard or something when you're playing soccer with your kid, I don't know that from experience, but then you could do something like this. So lower traffic areas, you can do something like this. The higher use areas, or if it's a big water damage, if it's a big area, then just replace, from stud to stud with the drywall. When you're doing a bigger repair, you have your stud here and your stud here, so you can screw your new drywall into those areas, but you still don't have anything on top and bottom. So one way to do it, if you have it open, is you can put in blocking wood. If that's not working, you can actually take strips of drywall that are 2 or 3 inches wide and you put them behind your drywall and create a piece of blocking that you can put your drywall up against. And you just use a strip of drywall and you screw through the top of that to hold it in place. And when you put your new drywall in, you can screw it through your drywall into your blocking drywall that's behind it. So after this gets a little bit dry, you want to take another scoop of mud and just seam it all down. Nice and easy. It's going to look funky when you first get it done or first try it. And bubbly, that's why I said if it's an area that is high use or high traffic, then you definitely want to replace it. Or get a kit. But even the kits, you can see, you'll be able to see unless you really, really spend time, mudding and sanding. And it's going to be weak for a little while. So you want to be sure that you don't press too hard or overdo it. Like I'm going to lay this on really thick right now, just so that the mud has a chance to seal up and hold the tape in. And then I'm going to walk away from it. So.
Great.
So you keep going with that, and then you repeat the processes that we showed you before. A gentle wet sanding, get this whole thing covered, and don't be afraid to spread it like all the way out, away from the tape, and put a bunch on. That's where the bigger knives are nice, but taking a bunch of this and spreading it out.
And so this is an instance where you want to use a generous amount of mud versus when you've already got a nice seam that's sturdy, you would want to use less mud.
Yeah, yes. I mean, and like we said before, you don't want to play with it too much, but since you don't have anything really behind there, I mean, Allison, you're talking about newspaper before. That's what a lot of people would do. They would shove a bunch of newspaper in there as backing, which you could still do. There's nothing really wrong with that.
And so this size hole may have been a little large for this process,
It's
but
just gonna take a while.
Right. And so I could see this being amazing for that soccer hole in the wall that no one knows anything about. I could see that, or the door handle thing. I mean, how many places have you been and you've seen a hole in the wall because someone's kid keeps pushing the door handle into the wall? So, there's just opportunities just to use this or put in a new piece of drywall.
New piece of drywall, yeah, and I would leave it like that and come back in the morning, and that's gonna be completely firm. And then before I would sand that down, I would, like this part in the middle that's a little lower, I would add more mud and walk away from it again. So, but
It's a hurry up and wait process.
Yeah, and there's a little hole there that, it's just really easy to fill. But yeah, I don't want to play with it anymore now, because something like this too, the more you play with it, even on a seam like this, if it's your first layer, you could pull that tape off. And once that tape starts to come off, you might as well just start over, because you'll never get it to look right. So.
Okay, so that was a quick tutorial on repair. We do have some additional resources on our, I think our window and our door. We've done another workshop on this.
Yeah, we touched a little bit of base on, because really whenever you're doing trim work or you're painting, or you're installing a window or a door, or even, repairing a window or a door, you're going to have to rely on one or two of these skills in one or two of the workshops. They're sort of all combined at times. It's like, you start doing one project and you're like, oh, I need to mud this corner because it cracked when I was taking my trim off to repair my trim, or something like that. But you can also email me. I'm Clark at LakewoodAlive's.org, and with any questions or anything else like that about any of the knowing your home stuff, or any problems you have in your house, or any projects you're working on.
Great. So now we're going to move on to cleanup.
So because we don't have a sink here, basically, that we can wash brushes in, or that the building owner would let us wash brushes in, we're going to take this stuff home and do it at home. But since you guys can't come with us, unfortunately, we'd love to have you at our houses. This is a quick, easy way to either store temporarily, or so you can get it to where you're cleaning up. Or if you are doing a project and you're going to start again the next day, you want to keep your brushes so you don't have to spend time cleaning them up, and that you'll still keep your brushes healthy. Make sure all excess paint is removed from your brushes.
Yeah.
And basically wrap it up, and it has to be airtight.
Saran wrap is also a good option.
Yep. If you have a paint can that you lost the cover for or something, or got damaged when you're taking it off, you can wrap that up with saran wrap temporarily. Always good. Maybe 2 days of work before I would clean it, or before I'd say you have to clean it. Or if you leave this in the bag for 2 days, you're going to damage the brush hairs, and then when you're trying to use it again, it'll basically turn into this, which you guys can't tell, but that's completely solid right there, because it was never cleaned, or it was wrapped up and left by somebody in a plastic bag. So
we turn those into volunteer awards. They get spray painted gold, and we use them. So,
but
you can give us your old paintbrushes.
But so yeah, wrap everything up. But if you're able to clean it, soap, like warm water is great. If you have 2 or 3 brushes, or a couple rollers, remove the rollers from the roller arm, and it's really easy. If you want to store your roller, or you want to get rid of your roller, you want to clean it, having a plastic bag, you just take that, you wrap your roller around in the plastic bag, you pull it out, keeps your hand clean, and then you would want to rinse this off really well, because as Allison stated before, if you get paint inside the little axis there, it will not want to roll, and it will not want to turn.
This is what not to do.
Yeah, you want to clean that off. So your rollers you can also rinse off too. I like to keep a bucket where I can fill halfway with water, 5-gallon bucket, and set all my paints, my water-based, more water cleanable paint tools in that bucket, and just rinse them, let them soak for a little bit, and then rinse them off in a stationary tub. Just warm water. It's a process. You can use You can buy a brush comb, which looks like it's a little tiny comb with metal teeth that are about 1.5 inches long, and that will comb out a lot of the stuff in your brush. You can also use an old hairbrush or a fine tooth comb to do the same thing. It's a good, easy way to get it clean, but really the best way to do it: soak it in water, rinse out your brush under running water, and then you flick it into your tub to try to dry it. Let it dry overnight, and then in the morning, make sure you break it up to make sure there's no dried paint that's stuck in there. And then you can use a brush comb on it, or you can try to rinse it again if you think there's anything stuck in there.
And then the wrapper that it comes in, I've not seen ours, but that is something that actually they're made very well, and you're supposed to keep them. They have Velcro on them.
Yeah, you can. I mean, this one's been used and rinsed a lot, so it's sort of tearing, but it's a really easy way to
Keep it in
slide.
shape.
Yeah, keep your brush in that shape, especially your angle brushes. So it can close up and it keeps that angle brush.
Yeah, I never knew that until somewhat recently, that you should keep your brushes in those.
But best idea is to always clean everything up after you're done with it. You know, like I said, 2 days on a project to clean your brushes. I mean, if you plan ahead, you want to quit. Like if I'm doing a project, I always give myself half an hour to 45 minutes before I know I have to leave to go somewhere, or I want to be done. So, excuse me, talking a lot today. I want to be done at 4 o'clock. I shut down the work part of the project at 3:15 and I clean everything up.
Right. So clean up, prep and clean up are the most important parts of these projects. And so there is the environmentally friendly way. So you can go ahead and clean those rollers if you want. You know, if you're going to paint a lot, then probably cleaning them is the best way to go. But if it's just a one project, you know, you could get rid of these, dispose of them by using the handy garbage can, or the trash bag thing, trash bag method. So a little Dawn dish soap when you're cleaning goes a long way on your roller covers, gets the paint out. So
Roller covers too, though. I mean, it's really I wouldn't recommend using them for more than like one job. You know, if you paint a whole room one color, that's great. But so many times I've seen in old houses or in donated tools from our great residents, a bag of roller covers they're like all like they might as well be baseball bats because they're hard and not usable.
chunky.
Because they never really dry 100%. So make sure, if you do use them overnight or you do wash them and try to use them again for the same project, that you want to squeeze them out and rinse them out as best as possible. Oftentimes I take like an old beach towel or something, and I just wring the whole roller out so that the beach towel will actually squeeze the water out the bottom as well as absorb anything that's coming out in the middle.
Okay, so I think we've covered everything. One thing that we want to highlight, Ian, if you could please bring up the PowerPoint one more time. If you are doing major repairs in your house, we want to tell you about a drywall lift that will save your back and probably your marriage. So we will be able to show you that. You can rent them locally.
Yeah, you can get them from Sunbelt. You can get them from Handy Rents. Any the big box stores that have rental supplies, you can get those. But yeah, I know it for a fact. I've done basement ceilings or drywalling on ceilings, and it's a super duper easy way to. Because when you're installing the drywall, you know, you're trying to hold a sheet of drywall and a drywall screw gun with a nice little dimple bit, which is something else we were going to tell you about. But it creates a little dimple when you're screwing in the drywall, so it's easier to mud those screws over. But trying to hold all that up is really hard. So this lift, which looks like that, this is our PowerPoint. It's a little lift that cranks, and basically if the drywall sits on top of it.
Look at how
flush.
happy this person looks using the drywall lift. So happy.
So you can crank it up, you can get it tight, you can get it in place, and then you can screw it. And it works. It's a back saver and a time saver, really. So, and they're about $50 a day at most local rental.
Yes, we have Handy Rents here in Lakewood, Sunbelt's nearby.
On Brook Park Road in Brook Park.
Yeah, so lots of options. We don't have one. We don't have one at the toolbox, but it is something that we are kind of gauging interest. So let us know if you want to borrow a drywall lift. It'll help us decide if we want to get one.
I have to purchase one. But.
So I think we've hit the end of our presentation.
Yeah.
So I want to say thanks to Matt for all this time and talent today.
Thanks for your help, Allison.
And our next workshop is on September 30th. You'll be seeing it go up tomorrow on Facebook, and it's on Electrical 101. We're bringing our friend John Turner back. We'll actually be at his workshop, which is something that we're kind of jealous of based on our very nice accommodations here, but his workshop is pretty amazing. So September 30th, we'll have Electrical 101, and then we have about 4 more workshops for the rest of the season, and you'll see those popping up here any day now. So thank you all so very, very much for spending your evening with us. And again, don't forget to reach out to us. You can find us on the lakewoodalive.org/about-us. Has our email and phone numbers. Matt M. Clark at lakewoodalive.org. I'm Allison, Lakewood Alive, and A. Urbanek at lakewoodalive.org. So thank you all so much. And we hope you have a great rest of your evening.